I'm a huge fan of the router, both the table, the plunge, the trim router. One of the biggest downsides though, especially when we use profile bits, which are very common, tear out and burning. I want to talk about what can cause that and what we can do to stop that. I want to say up front, all of this applies to plunge router, trim router, router table. It's easier for me to film at the router table, so we're going to be doing the filming there, but don't think that these are any different on the plunge router or the trim router that you may be using. Number one, dirty bits. For most people, you just don't clean router bits that frequently. And unless your bit is extremely old, there's a good chance that cleaning it is going to increase some kind of improved level. It may not be perfect, but it's usually, at least for a while, going to improve the quality of the cut. I use Simple Green and a toothbrush. I usually let it soak a little bit in the Simple Green and then just kind of brush it off. So I would highly suggest cleaning these. Make sure you hit both the face and the backside of the cutter if they are not extremely old and you're having issues. If that doesn't work and you've had the bit for a long time or you've used it a ton, it's probably dull. Now you can either buy a new bit, which is generally what I do, but they also sell sharpening kind of credit card size things and files, and a lot of people will put kind of a fresh edge by just honing over the profile bit. It works better on some than others. That's up to you. I think there is a bit of skill level there where you can make it a lot worse if you do it wrong, but it may be dull and old anyways. So if you want to try that, definitely give that a go. A lot of people find really good success in extending the life of the bit by getting one of those little kind of sharpening cards, I'll just call it, and honing the edge. But if you're not in that camp and it's quite old, buy a new bit. On the topic of buying new bits, I'm going to mention this, and this is just how I've always done it, and I don't want to say it's the right way or it's the wrong way. I tend to err on the side of more cheaper bits than one expensive bit when it comes to profiles. And here's my logic here, my experience. I've bought expensive roundover bits. I've bought the Freud 4-cutter one bit. It's better at the beginning for maybe, let's say the bit has 4/4 of life, 100% life. For that first 25%, it is better than the new cheaper bit. So you do get a better cut and experience of there. But when we start to move into that second quarter of life, it starts to even out with the kind of cheaper bits. And we're in this pretty good, not great. So think of that as the starting point for the cheaper bits. Once we though get into the 3/4 of the Freud bit, so we've already used over half of it, its quality is now worse than the starting point of these cheaper bits. And when we get into the 4th quarter, we're towards the end of the life of the bit, it's significantly worse. My kind of theory has always been I'd rather buy, I think maybe 3 or 4 of these are the price of the Freud bit. I'd rather get 3 to 4 number 2 spots, 2nd quarter, instead of one really good quarter, a good 2nd quarter, and then bad 3rd and 4th quarter. So I can get 3 or 4 fresh edges essentially by buying 3 or 4 of these cheaper ones in comparison to one really expensive one. Now for some people that logic just it's not going to make sense. For other people they're just like, I want the best quality. That's totally fine. On things like plunging bits, I buy really nice white side ones, but when it comes to profile, I go usually with these Chinese ones, and I go with quality over quantity because I think the sharper brand new edge is better than the kind of midway dullness life of an expensive bit. Let's say though that you've got a bit, it's relatively new, you've used it some, and you're having problems. What are our next most likely causes? The first one in my experience is always going to be you're taking too big of a cut. Let's say you want to remove this, what is this, 1/2 inch, 5/8, 3/8, something like that, round over. You can try this in one cut. I wouldn't even take this in 2. I would take this in 3, if not 3 plus a skim pass. And if you are going to try to take big chunky cuts out, I highly suggest always leaving a 32nd of an inch at the end to do a skim pass through, and it will remove a lot of the burning and clean up a lot of the tear out. Though we'll talk a little more about some tear out reasons in a bit here, and then also how to deal with those, because it's not often going to clear out all tear out, especially if it's on some kind of curved shape. But having a skim pass at the end, if you're taking out chunky bites along the way, is going to help a lot, or just take it in 3 or 4 passes instead of 2. Now the next 2 require a lot of trial and error. The first is going to be our feed speed, how fast we are either moving the workplace through the router bit at the router table, or we are moving the router around the workpiece if we're using a plunge or a trim router. Most tools like a moderate steady pace, table saw, think of how you cut through the table saw. You don't blast it through there, you also don't kind of inch it and take forever. It's this kind of moderate steady pace. So does the router. The router likes that as well. However, sometimes the wood just doesn't want to comply. You may be going, your normal moderate pace could be either too fast or too slow. And if you're on the wrong side of that, either way, you can often get tear out or burning. Usually when something's too slow, your movement, we're getting burning because that bit is sitting in the same spot for longer, causing heat up, and it's just leaving that burning behind. And oftentimes if you're going way too fast, instead of being able to take out a ton of little cuts over and over, you are just kind of ramming it through there and it's just gouging it out. So if you're having problems with burning or tear out and you think you're doing your feed speed pretty normal, whatever, try a little slower, then try a little faster. And if one of them works, now you know that for at least that piece of wood and that router bit, the feed speed needs to be altered a little. And number 2 in the list of trial and error is going to be the speed of the bit. Now we know, most of us know that the larger the bit, the slower we want to go. And the line, kind of the school of thought, is over an inch in diameter, slow the thing down. But I also find that even in smaller bits, sometimes it's just burning and slowing it down can help, or other times speeding it up can help if it's slow from a previous project and I thought it would be fine. Again, this is one you're going to have to play with. It's never a bad idea if you're making a project, you're cutting something out of a piece of wood, to save those off-cut scraps and do test cuts at the router table or with the plunge router ahead of time and figure out what the bit speed is. Now I find I don't have to change bit speed all that often. It's usually feed speed that is the bigger problem, or the thing that I correct more often. Occasionally with like a 1/4 inch roundover bit, I'll kick it down a speed and sometimes it helps, but that's usually more in terms of the diameter of the bit. If we're using a big bit and we're going too fast, we're gonna have problems. If it's over an inch, kick it down at least 1 speed on your variable speed routers. And the final one, at least that I experience regularly, and mainly comes along with curved shapes and end grain and highly figured wood or interlocked grain, is the grain direction changes. And we're having the problem where essentially pulling out instead of cutting through. Now, I know that's kind of like weird to try to picture in your head, but just imagine you are going along this. We want to be cutting so that the fiber behind what we're cutting is supported, so that we're not kind of like ripping through. We want the thing behind it to have a back wall, kind of like a zero clearance on a table saw. Normally we feed with the cutter spinning into the wood so that we are removing, or excuse me, we feed this way, the cutter's going this way, and it's removing as it pulls through so that behind is supported. But when you get crazy shapes like this, you're actually no longer going on that same plane everywhere. You've kind of adjusted the board here, which can change the grain direction. So at times, and including with end grain or highly figured wood as well, we have to do something called a climb cut. Now I know a lot of people, I don't want to say fear the climb cut, but they talk about it as if it's this like mythical beast. I use it pretty frequently, but I only use it in really small sections. I have to do roundovers on a lot of really kind of weird, intricate shapes, and a lot of the time I'll get tear out if I don't do a small section of a climb cut. So we're going to film at the router table because it's easier for you to see there. All of these apply to plunge trim routers as well, and I will show you specifically where I use the climb cut and how much it helps. I'm going to attempt to get tear out or burning on all of these pieces here so then we can work our way backwards and get rid of it. So let's head over to the router table. Now for the testing phase of this, objective 1 is to cause some burnout. I've got a 1/4 inch roundover bit in here. It's kind of like middle of the road of its life. It's not new, but it's not super dull. It's a little bit dirty, but kind of at a level most people wouldn't rush to go clean it. So I think it's kind of in that perfect middle ground where most people's router bits are. Generically, not super sharp, and most people's aren't super dull. They're just kind of in that middle ground. Now, since I'm trying to cause some turnout, we've got soft, hard, I'm not sure, maple of some sort, walnut, an unknown softwood, I don't know where that came from, and then some pine. So I'm gonna go a little too fast to try to get some tear out. I'm gonna take too big of a cut, try to get some tear out. I'm gonna go a little too slow for some burning. I want to create problems here so that then we can fix them by changing things. Well, I got close enough to the results I wanted. I did get some burning eventually on the end grain of this maple, so we can talk about that. I got plenty of tear out on the curves. I've seen this a million times. It's really bad. We'll talk about how to fix that. And then I'm going to show you what I would consider kind of acceptable tear out, the kind of tear out that I wouldn't worry about, and I'd be just take it right to sanding and a little 150 or 220, and it'll be gone. I rarely find that, especially on curves, I get a totally perfect finish off of this. So I'm always expecting to do a little sanding, and especially when we hit this kind of change in grain, there's always a little tear out. As long as it's minimal, I don't mind it whatsoever. So I will show you the difference between really bad and we need to fix that, and totally acceptable, we can sand it out. Let's begin here with what I would consider acceptable levels of tear out. And it's each time from here to here and here to here. When we change direction, this whole area gets some tear out on it. Going down, we're totally fine. This is acceptable tear out in that a few swipes with 150 and 220 are going to take care of that entirely, and you'll never notice. I would be totally fine if this was my final cut on the router. Again, you can see right here when we're changing, we're swooping from there to there, we're getting a little bit of tear out. Totally fine here, totally fine here. Interestingly, this is just spilled over finish, so ignore all of that. A little bit of roughness on the end grain, no problem there. When we go to the hard maple, I think this must be hard maple because of how actually smooth this is, yet I got some burning here. This is borderline between try to take another cut at it and sand it out. It's not terrible, you could sand that, but I'd love to take a skim pass here. Usually it's not very deep. And then here on this unknown softwood, maybe pine, I don't know. I didn't buy this. We've got extremely bad tear out. And you'll notice it's in the same spot on every side. It's always on this down slope right here as we're changing grain direction. And this is, you're not going to be able to sand this out without putting a giant divot in just these areas. That's going to look weird. This has to be fixed. And this is where, for me, the climb cut comes into play. On the pine here, another one of a little rough on the end here. This will sand out really easily. I can barely feel it with my finger. Tad bit of burning right there, but overall pretty good on this pine. I wouldn't be too concerned about this either way. So we're going to go in order here from worst to not the worst. We're going to start with the climb cut, and we're going to fix this guy. We're going to get it as close to good as possible to where we're just a little sanding. So do a climb cut here and fix that guy. We're going to do a little feed speed kind of change here and try to get rid of this burning on the end here. And by get rid of, I mean just get it so little that it's just a swipe or two of sandpaper. I'm not expecting it to be entirely gone, because this is a Chinese bit that's probably halfway through its life. And we're going to try some skim passes on here and a little climb cut on this end grain, see if we can clean these up. But as I mentioned before, if these two were just straight to sanding, I'd be totally fine with that. So I'm going to bring you in closer here, and we're going to talk about the premise of a climb cut. Now, to best explain the climb cut, we have to explain what we normally do. Router bits always spin the same direction. When it's in a table, it is counterclockwise. When it is going down plunge router, trim router, it is clockwise. That's why the bits are all the same and they have the cutting face on the same side. Normally on a router table, we like to feed right to left. We are going into the cutter so that it is supported and we are pushing through. The climb cut takes this concept and reverses it, in that we allow ourselves to go with where the bit is going, which is where the danger comes from. It will grab and it will want to just shoot it off of the table. If you are not holding this down, it will go flying because it is kind of scooping in and wants to pull it along. What that helps us with, though, is it allows us to go against the normal direction. So we're getting the grain from a different angle, essentially. Instead of it going in, or excuse me, this way going in, it is pulling through as it goes. We're not providing that same resistance. We are allowing the bit to climb up there. If you've ever done this with a plunge router and you go the wrong direction, I'll just call it, and you climb cut, you'll feel the router want to like pull and walk away from you. It wants to just climb right out of your hands. So the way I approach this is I don't try to climb cut this entire thing. I simply want to climb cut the 3 areas that I've got really bad tear out. I just mark these out on the other side as this is face down and I can't see this. And on this one, it's just these 3 kind of hills that go down here. I only need to climb cut these 3 areas. There's no reason to try to do this entire thing. Now, the way I traditionally do this is I start with the climb cut because we need that area removed. Some people will try to normal cut everything else and then climb cut. I like to do the climb cut first. So essentially it's, remember, spinning this way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to engage left to right when normally we go right to left. And I'm going to just swoop in and I'm going to only cut these areas. I'm watching the center of the bearing as my line up there. We're probably going to overshoot a little bit, but that's okay. The bigger the bit, the further out it is, but I line it up with the center of the bearing. We're going to do that one. and then we're going to do that one. And that's going to be our 3 climb cuts. And then we can come back right to left and cut the rest as normal, because if we did it correctly, that material will have been removed and we don't have to try to hold the thing steady the entire way. Just light engagement on these 3 parts. I'll show you how it's done. If you have got yourself into a situation where you have to climb cut, I do not suggest trying to take one big climb cut. I would rather take this in 2 or 3 small climb cuts. We don't want to remove any more material than we have to while doing this. If you try to take a big chunk out of this and you are not holding on tight, I've had this happen before, only once, and it was a time when I didn't realize what I was doing and I did it without knowing I was doing it and I had it fly across the room. Take a small skim cut of this off the top. So save it for either your second to last pass or 2 small skim cuts, depending upon how bad this is. Do not hog this out with a climb cut. Well, after 2 passes, a significant improvement. I had to slow down my feed speed a bit. Got a little burning there on this area. That's fine. That's easy to sand out. It doesn't look, it's borderline. I'd probably take another skim pass to see what I can do about this. This wood, though, is just interestingly tearing out. I don't know what it is, but I'm much happier with that. We can definitely still identify it. This will sand out relatively easily. That is what the climb cut does. If you look at the first one compared to this, it's a lot better. On this hard maple, we've got the little bit of burning. I'm going to attempt here to go with a feed rate change at first. I'm going to try to go just a little bit faster. If that doesn't work, we are going to attempt a bit speed change, and we'll slow it down a little bit. Well, we got a significant improvement here after slowing the bit speed down from, 6 to 5 or 5 to 4, whatever it is, 1 speed down, and then a light shallow skim pass, and then a light shallow skim pass climb cut. I'm realizing now, it took me a minute to figure out why I was never hitting this top. I think when I originally did this on trying to cause it, I must have tipped this down in there because the router bit is not actually touching this top part, and I would have been chasing burning forever until I removed half of this thing. So I think that's what the problem up here is. But the rest of this is significantly improved. So I'm very happy with that. Obviously, you have to be careful and leave yourself a little bit of room left over because it took me 3 different attempts. And I'm talking, again, a 64th or less of an inch there on the skim pass. This is totally sandable. If I had not accidentally dipped it in there, I don't think this would be there because you can see it's barely anywhere visible in this middle and bottom. And you can also see from this other side here where I didn't accidentally tip it in there, totally fine. No burning, everything's good all on that end right there. For these last 2, as I said earlier, I probably would not touch these again with the router. I would just go sand out what little bits left, but we're going to see just how close to perfect we can get them. I'm going to take a very shallow skim pass. I'm going to climb both of the end grains here. The side I'll just do normally, it's totally fine. I'm going to attempt to climb these 2 little sections here and see what we can do, but otherwise, I legitimately wouldn't risk causing any more problems, and I would just go sand this out if it was normal. On the pine, little to no improvement from the climb cut. I'm noticing now, just like on the maple, all of these, when I was attempting to cause tear out, I must have been pushing hard down and in, trying to go fast, because I'm realizing that even when I'm removing material down here, I still have some pencil line marks up there, and that only makes sense if I was tipping into there. The walnut, however, I mean, this is borderline. I mean, a little swipe with 220. It improved, let's just call it 90%, but it improved 90% from something that was already 95% of the way there. I think there are plenty of people right off of this in this condition who would not sand this at all. So definitely a little improvement from climbing in this area and then taking just the lightest skim pass. This is surprisingly smooth for walnut end grain. Well, after going through all of the fixes, I am pretty happy with where we are now versus where we started. Much like health and a lot of other things, preventative measures are going to get you pretty far compared to trying to fix something in the end. For example, this horrific tear out that was on this, I wouldn't have had to do multiple different climb cuts to get rid of most of this to where it is now an acceptable place where I can sand it, had I not taken gigantic fast chunks in the first place. So if you do not cause as much problems from the start, you're going to have an easier time cleaning it up, if that makes sense. One thing I didn't cover, and it's because I don't call it tear out, but I call it chipping out, but some people do. If you are doing like a square board like this, so 2 long grain sides, 2 end grain sides, very basic, or rectangle, excuse me, and you are getting chipping out from the ends of these corners here, what you need to do to try to kind of, I don't want to say prevent this, but clean this up, do the end grain sides first. Just do both of them first and then come through and do the long grain sides. And that should clean up most of the chipping out, because when it's chipping out, it will be taking with it fibers that are going to be removed anyways. I just don't call that tear out, so I didn't think to include it earlier. End grain, then long grain, and that should solve 90% of your problems there. A little bit of veneer problems can arise no matter what you do. But other than that, hopefully you learned something. And if you have anything you can teach me, please add it below. I'm always looking to learn. All right, thanks for joining me today. Bye.